I booked the Airbnb because I needed a quiet place to stay for a week while working on a project out of town. Hotels were expensive in that area, and this one looked perfect. A small cabin-style guest house on private property, just outside the main town. The pictures made it look peaceful, surrounded by trees, with a small porch and a warm interior. The reviews were decent, a few people mentioning how secluded it was, which was exactly what I wanted. I liked my privacy, especially when working. When I arrived, it was late afternoon, and the air smelled like pine and damp soil. The driveway was long and narrow, leading to the back of a larger property where the cabin sat by itself. The main house was maybe 100 yards away, but mostly hidden by trees. The host wasn't home, just a note on the door welcoming me, and a key left under a small ceramic owl beside the steps. Inside, the place looked just like the pictures. A small open layout, one bed, a kitchenette, a table with 2 chairs, and a little couch facing a TV mounted to the wall. Everything seemed clean, though a bit dated, old wood floors, worn furniture, but it had charm. There was a faint smell of mildew, the kind that comes from old wooden places that don't get much sunlight, but I didn't think much of it. The bathroom was at the far end, small but clean, with a single window that looked out onto the trees behind the cabin. I unpacked, made some coffee, and set up my laptop on the table. For the first few hours, everything felt fine. The place was quiet, too quiet actually. There was no sound of cars, no people, not even distant traffic. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the floorboards when I walked around. That night, I stayed up late working. Around midnight, I went outside for a bit of fresh air. The sky was pitch black except for the faint glow of the porch light. The forest beyond the property was dense, and I could hear faint rustling sounds, probably animals. I remember how still the air felt. Not windy, not even cold, just heavy. When I went back inside, I locked the door, checked the windows, and went to bed. Sometime during the night, I woke up to a sound. It was faint but clear, the sound of gravel crunching outside. Slow steps, one after another, somewhere near the porch. I froze in bed, holding my breath. The steps paused for a few seconds, then continued, this time closer to the window. I could tell by the rhythm, a careful, uneven pattern, like someone trying not to make noise. I stared at the window, the thin curtain barely blocking the light from the porch. My mind tried to reason it out, maybe a deer, maybe a raccoon, but it sounded too heavy. I didn't move. After a minute or two, the sound stopped completely. I stayed awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to come back. Didn't. Eventually, I fell asleep again, but not deeply. The next morning, I went outside to check. The gravel path was still damp from the morning dew, and there were footprints. They weren't clear shoe prints, but you could tell where the gravel had been compressed. Small, shallow marks leading from the edge of the path toward the porch, then back out again. I told myself it could have been the host checking on something or maybe someone passing through, even though the cabin was far from the road. I tried to brush it off. That day, I went out to take pictures for my project, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. When I came back around sunset, I noticed something small but strange. The bathroom window was slightly open. I was sure I'd closed it when I first arrived. The lock was turned upward, and the window was open about an inch. I shut it tightly, made sure it clicked, and checked the rest of the cabin. Everything else seemed normal. That night, I kept the lights on for longer. I worked at the table until around 1 a.m., and again, I heard its slow footsteps on the gravel outside. This time I knew it wasn't an animal. The sound was deliberate, careful, almost measured. Came closer, then stopped near the side of the cabin. I could hear faint movement, like something brushing against the wall, then a dull knock, as if someone had leaned against the siding. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the door, heart pounding so loud I could hear it. After a long stretch of silence, the sound faded away. In the morning, I checked again. Nothing looked disturbed, but I noticed a faint handprint on the outside of the bathroom window. Not clear enough to see detail, just a smudge, like someone had pressed against the glass. My stomach sank. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was old, maybe from before I arrived. Still, I decided to text the host. I told them I thought maybe someone had been wandering near the property. I didn't get a reply. That evening, I made sure everything was locked tight. I even moved the small table against the door before going to bed, just in case. I left one lamp on. I couldn't stand the darkness anymore. Around 3 a.m., I woke up again. The air felt different, warmer, heavier, like the cabin was holding its breath. I listened, and then I heard it. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was the creak of the porch boards, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking across it. Then a faint scraping sound at the door. Metal on metal. The doorknob moved, not fully turning, just a slow, careful attempt. My body went cold. I couldn't move. The table rattled slightly, the sound barely audible, but enough to know someone was definitely trying to get in. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stayed in bed until sunrise, not daring to move. When I finally looked outside, there were clear footprints on the porch, actual shoe prints this time, medium-sized, leading right up to the door. I packed my things fast that morning. Before leaving, I went around the cabin one last time, and when I got to the back, near the bathroom window, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Beneath the window, hidden behind a row of shrubs, was a small crawlspace door, old, wooden, painted the same color as the cabin. The lock on it was broken, hanging loose. The ground near it was disturbed, like someone had been there recently. I didn't open it. I didn't even want to look at it. I got in my car and drove straight into town. I sent a message to the host explaining what happened, but again, no reply. Later that night, when I checked the Airbnb app again, the listing was gone, completely removed as if it never existed. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the property address on Google Maps. The satellite image showed the main house, but the cabin wasn't visible. Just a patch of trees where it should have been. I tried searching for any mention of it online, old reviews, property records, nothing. It was like that cabin had been erased. I still don't know what was going on there. Maybe someone was living on that property without the host knowing. Maybe the listing wasn't real to begin with. But I'll never forget that slow sound of the doorknob turning, the weight of those steps on the porch, or the broken crawlspace door under that bathroom window. Since then, I've stayed in other Airbnbs, but I'm careful now. I check under every bed, behind every curtain, and I never stay anywhere that's too quiet or too far from the main road. Because that week taught me something. Sometimes the danger isn't ghosts or haunted houses. It's the people you don't see. The ones who move quietly outside your window in the middle of the night, waiting for a chance to see if you remembered to lock the door. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to where I needed to be. I was traveling for a small photography job and only needed a place for 4 nights. The listing said it was a cozy guest suite with private entry, located behind a family home in a quiet suburban area. The pictures showed a tidy little space, a bed, a small table, a TV, and a clean bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it looked fine. I didn't care much as long as it was safe, quiet, and had decent Wi-Fi so I could edit my work at night. When I arrived, it was late afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place with wide driveways, trimmed lawns, and tall wooden fences separating each property. The host wasn't around, just a message saying the key would be left under a flower pot near the door. The unit was built behind the main house, separated by a narrow path lined with potted plants. The space was smaller than I expected, but clean. The air smelled faintly like lemon cleaner mixed with something musty, maybe from being closed up too long. The layout was simple. One room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a small bathroom in the corner. There was a closet built into the wall next to the bed, the sliding kind with mirrored doors. I remember catching my reflection in it and thinking it made the room look bigger than it really was. I unpacked a few things, set up my camera bag near the table, and went out for groceries. When I came back after sunset, the whole property was quiet. Only a dim porch light was on at the back of the main house. The air was cool and still, and I remember how the sound of my shoes on the gravel felt too loud. Inside, the place felt warmer but somehow heavier, like the air didn't circulate well. I opened the small window near the kitchenette to let in some fresh air. That first night was fine until around 3 a.m. I woke up to a faint thumping sound. It was slow, irregular. It took me a second to realize it was coming from inside the wall behind the closet. It wasn't loud, just a dull bump every few seconds. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what it could be. At first, I thought maybe the plumbing or pipes. Old houses made noises like that sometimes. After a few minutes, it stopped. I fell back asleep, telling myself not to think about it. The next morning, I checked behind the closet area just to be sure. The closet backed onto what looked like the edge of the house. There was a small vent near the floor, and I figured maybe some animal had gotten inside the walls. The host's number was in the welcome note, but I didn't bother texting. I assumed it wasn't a big deal. That day, I spent most of my time out taking photos around town. When I came back in the evening, the place smelled a little different, like dampness or maybe stale air. I opened the window again. I noticed something else too. The mirrored closet door had a faint smudge near the handle, like a partial fingerprint. I wiped it off without thinking much of it. That night, I stayed up editing photos. Around midnight, I got up to grab a drink and caught something small but strange. The mirrored closet door was slightly open. Just an inch or two, not enough to notice at first glance. I was sure I hadn't touched it since the morning. The inside of the closet was empty except for a few hangers and an ironing board. I closed it fully, heard the click of the track, and went back to work. Around 2:30 a.m., the same sound from the night before started again. The thumping, this time closer. It sounded like it came from right behind the closet wall, not deep within the structure like plumbing. It was sharper, more solid, like something knocking softly but deliberately. I froze in bed, staring at the mirrored doors. Every few seconds, a faint bump, then silence, then another. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and waited. After maybe a minute, it stopped completely. The next morning, I checked that wall again. I tapped on it, half expecting it to sound hollow. It did, not thin drywall hollow, but there was an echo to it, like there was a small space behind it. The layout of the unit didn't make sense for there to be another room behind that wall. Outside, that section of the structure was bordered by the neighbor's fence and some shrubs. That day, I couldn't focus on work. My mind kept going back to the noises. When I came back later that night, something about the place felt off immediately. The air was stuffier than before, and the faint smell of sweat or body odor hung near the closet. I knew I hadn't been there all day, so that smell couldn't have come from me. I kept the lights on and tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop looking at the mirrored closet. I even propped my suitcase against the doors just to feel more at ease. It helped a little. Around 3 a.m. again, the same hour, I woke up to a noise. Not thumping this time, but a faint scraping sound, like something sliding against wood, came from the closet. The suitcase I'd propped against it rattled slightly. I froze. My entire body went tense. I could hear the faint shift of something pressing from behind, maybe on the wall or the inside of the closet itself. I stayed perfectly still for what felt like 10 minutes. Then it stopped. I didn't sleep again after that. I just sat in bed waiting for daylight. When morning came, I moved the suitcase aside and opened the closet. Nothing. The hangers were in place, the ironing board leaning the same way. But near the baseboard, in the back corner, there was a small gap, like the trim had been removed slightly, exposing a narrow crack. It looked big enough for air to move through, maybe even big enough for something to slide a wire or small tool inside. I crouched down, but the space was too dark to see anything. I felt a deep unease that whole day. I barely ate. I started to regret booking such a cheap place. When I came back after sunset, I noticed that one of the lights, the small lamp near the bed, was unplugged. I hadn't touched it that morning. The plug lay neatly beside the outlet. I knew I hadn't done that. I slept with my shoes on that night just in case. I moved the table in front of the closet and set my heavy camera tripod against the door handle. It was the only thing I could think to do. I barely slept, only dozing in short bursts. Sometime after 2 a.m., I woke to a faint vibration sound, like wood or drywall shifting under pressure. I held my breath, staring toward the closet. The mirrored door trembled slightly, just enough to make the reflection shimmer in the low light. Then came one soft, deliberate thud. Then another. Then the sound of air moving. A soft exhale, muffled but distinct, coming from inside the wall. My skin went cold. I sat there frozen, every nerve screaming to move but terrified to make a sound. I stayed like that until it stopped, then forced myself up, grabbed my keys and went outside. The night air was cold and silent. The main house was completely dark. I stood there for a few minutes, listening. Nothing. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside, so I sat in my car until the sky started turning gray. When it was light enough, I went back into the unit to grab my things. I noticed the table I'd pushed in front of the closet had shifted slightly, just a few inches, but enough that it wasn't in the same spot. The mirror door was open an inch again. I didn't even check it this time. I packed everything as fast as I could and left. A few hours later, from a cafe, I went online to see if there were any complaints about the place. The listing was still there. I clicked on it, scrolling through reviews. One from a few months back caught my eye. Said, "Strange noises at night. Feels like someone moves behind the walls. Didn't feel safe." There were no replies from the host, just silence after that review. I reported the listing to the platform, saying I felt unsafe and suspected someone might be accessing the space from a hidden section of the wall. I never heard back. A week later, the listing was gone. Out of curiosity, months later, I looked up the address again. The property was for sale now. In the new listing photos, the guest suite looked different, repainted, rearranged, but I noticed one detail. The closet was gone completely. That entire section had been walled off, replaced by a plain corner. I don't know what was behind that wall, and I don't want to, but I'll never forget the sound of that slow breathing in the dark, just a few feet away, separated from me by nothing but a thin sheet of drywall. Since then, whenever I book an Airbnb, I always check every wall, every vent, and every closet before I sleep. I booked an Airbnb for a short weekend trip just outside a small coastal town I'd never been to before. I needed a break, and the listing looked peaceful. A small guest house behind someone's main property, surrounded by trees, just a mile from the ocean. The photos showed a clean, cozy interior, a little patio with string lights, and a driveway that curved away from the main road. It seemed quiet, private, and exactly what I needed after months of city noise. I arrived late Friday afternoon, around 6 p.m. The sun was low, orange light hitting the tops of the trees, and the air smelled faintly of salt and pine. The driveway was gravel, and as I pulled in, I saw the main house on the left, 2 stories, white siding, big porch, and the smaller guest house tucked further back behind it. It was painted light gray, with a narrow set of steps leading up to the door. There was no sign of anyone outside, and I remember feeling relieved at that. I wasn't in the mood for small talk with a host. I parked near the guest house and grabbed my bag. There was a faint hum of insects, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, and the distant rush of waves somewhere beyond the trees. I unlocked the door using the code the host had sent me earlier and stepped inside. It was exactly like the pictures, small but neat. There was a bed against the wall, a tiny kitchenette, a desk under the window, and a single bathroom. The window faced the trees, and for a moment I just stood there listening to how quiet it was. After unpacking a bit, I sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and sent a quick message to a friend to let them know I made it safely. Then I went outside to stretch my legs. There was a narrow path that led from the guest house around the side of the main property, disappearing into the trees. I walked a few hundred feet down it until I reached a clearing where you could faintly hear the ocean. The air was cool and still. I stood there for a few minutes and then headed back before it got too dark. That night, I showered, made a simple dinner, and watched a movie on my laptop. Around 10 p.m., I noticed a faint light flickering through the window. It looked like someone's flashlight or maybe a phone light moving outside. I assumed it was the host walking their dog or checking something on the property, so I didn't think much of it. But it happened again about half an hour later, a quick flash of light sweeping past the window, followed by the sound of gravel shifting, like footsteps. I muted the movie and listened. There was nothing for a while, just crickets and the hum of the fridge. Then I heard what sounded like the back gate creak open. I froze. My first thought was maybe someone was trying to check into the wrong building, mistaking my guest house for another rental. I waited, my ears straining for any sound. It stayed quiet for a full minute, and then I heard the crunch of gravel again, softer this time, like someone walking away. After that, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. They were all latched. I told myself it was probably the host, or maybe a neighbor taking a shortcut through the property. I tried to ignore it, finished my movie, and went to bed around midnight. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The air felt heavier, like the kind of silence that follows after a sound you can't quite remember hearing. I stared up at the ceiling and then glanced toward the window. The curtains were slightly open, and I thought I saw movement. A faint shape just outside, standing still. My heart started to pound. I stayed perfectly still, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. After a few seconds, the shape moved, just slightly, like a person adjusting their weight from one leg to another. I reached slowly toward my phone on the nightstand and turned on the screen. The faint glow lit up the room. The figure outside didn't move. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I sat there for what felt like forever, until finally the shape turned and disappeared toward the trees. I stayed awake the rest of the night, barely moving, until the first light came through the window. The next morning, I checked outside. There were faint shoe prints in the damp dirt near the edge of the steps, heading toward the trees behind the property. I told myself it had to be someone from the main house, though I didn't see anyone come or go. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the unease. I decided to leave the property for most of the day, just to get out of there. I drove into town, walked along the beach, had lunch at a small cafe, and tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. When I got back around sunset, everything looked calm. The air was cool again. The string lights on the patio were glowing faintly, and the guest house looked harmless. Still, I couldn't relax. I checked all the locks again that night, pulled the curtains tightly closed, and left a small light on. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a faint scratching sound. It wasn't coming from the window this time, it was at the door. Slow, deliberate scraping like metal against wood. I held my breath and sat up, staring toward the door. The sound stopped, then started again, slightly higher up on the door frame. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and pointed it toward the door. The scratching stopped completely. I waited several minutes before moving. Then, very quietly, I got up and looked through the peephole. It was pitch black outside. Nothing moved. I turned off the flashlight, backed away from the door, and sat on the bed. My hands were shaking. I stayed awake again until dawn. The next morning, I checked the door in daylight. There were small marks near the handle. Tiny scratches that definitely hadn't been there before. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was had been trying to do something with the lock. I thought about contacting the host, but part of me felt uneasy about even mentioning it. What if it was the host? I decided I'd leave that night instead of waiting until morning. I packed my bag quietly, kept everything near the door, and planned to drive out as soon as it got dark enough that no one would see me packing. I figured I'd rather drive through the night than spend another hour there. But around 7 p.m., just before sunset, I went outside to load my bag into the car, and I noticed something. The small motion sensor light that had been mounted above the guest house door wasn't working anymore. It had worked the first night, flickering on when I arrived. Now it stayed dark no matter how close I got. That detail made my skin crawl. Someone would have had to disable it physically. I went back inside and locked the door. My heart was pounding, and I could barely think straight. I waited until full dark, then took my bag, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside. It was dead quiet. The trees were just silhouettes against the night sky, and the air felt unnaturally still. I walked fast toward my car. My phone flashlight shook in my hand as I moved it ahead of me. When I reached the car, I froze. There was something on the windshield, a folded piece of paper tucked under the wiper. My throat went dry. I snatched it out, climbed into the car, locked the doors, and turned on the overhead light. It was a piece of notebook paper, ripped unevenly, with handwriting that looked rushed. It said, "You shouldn't stay here alone." That was it. No name, no signature. I threw the paper into the passenger seat, started the car, and reversed down the gravel driveway as fast as I could without losing control. The headlights caught glimpses of the trees, the main house, the empty windows, and then I was back on the road, driving with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. I didn't stop until I was 40 miles away at a small roadside motel. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and sat awake for hours just thinking about that note and the scratches on the door. The next morning, I checked my email. There was a message from the Airbnb host, sent around 2 a.m. It said, "Hey, I noticed you checked out early. Hope everything's okay." That was it. No explanation, no mention of anything strange. I didn't reply. I just reported the listing and moved on. A few weeks later, I went back to the listing out of curiosity. It was gone, completely removed. Sometimes I think about that weekend and what would have happened if I had stayed one more night. Maybe it was someone watching from the woods. Maybe it was someone who knew the place wasn't really being rented out legitimately. Whatever it was, I know one thing. Someone was out there, watching me through that window, waiting for me to fall asleep again. And I'll never use an Airbnb that says, "private guest house behind main property" ever again. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, close to where I had to work for a few days, and the pictures made it look clean enough. It was a small single-story house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in a town I'd never been to before. The owner listed it as a cozy private home, but from the photos, it looked more like an older rental that had been redone just enough to look decent online. I didn't think much of it. I just needed somewhere to sleep, shower, and keep my stuff for 3 nights. I got there in the early evening, just before dark. The house sat on a corner lot, a little separated from the other houses. There were big trees around it, their branches stretching over the roof, and a chain-link fence enclosing a backyard that looked overgrown. The grass hadn't been mowed in a while, and a couple of trash bins sat half-tipped near the driveway. It wasn't terrible, but it didn't look quite as nice as the photos. When I walked up to the door, the neighborhood felt strangely empty. A few porch lights were on here and there, but I didn't hear any cars, kids, or dogs. Nothing. Just the faint buzz of insects and the wind brushing through the trees. I unlocked the front door using the code the host had sent me. Inside, the air was a little stale, like the place hadn't been used in a while. There was a faint smell of cleaning spray mixed with something musty underneath it. The living room had an old couch, a small coffee table, and a TV mounted on the wall. The kitchen was visible through an open doorway, small but tidy, with a fridge, a microwave, and a few basic utensils on the counter. The bedroom had a single queen bed with plain white sheets, a small dresser, and a nightstand with a lamp. The curtains were thin, and the windows looked out onto the backyard. I dropped my duffel bag on the bed and went to check the bathroom. It was old but functional. Peeling paint, a mirror that had lost its shine around the edges, and a shower curtain that looked newer than everything else. After unloading my things, I went to a nearby store to grab some groceries, came back, made a quick dinner, and spent the rest of the night on my laptop. Everything was fine until around midnight, when I started hearing noises, faint, random creaks. I figured it was the house settling, or maybe the wind moving the trees against the roof. It wasn't loud, but every now and then I'd hear a soft thump, like something brushing against the wall or the floorboards shifting underweight. I checked the thermostat, thinking maybe the heater was kicking on and off, but it was steady. I tried to ignore it. Eventually, I fell asleep. At some point in the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure what time it was, but it was dark and quiet. I had that heavy, disoriented feeling you get when you wake up suddenly. Then I realized what had pulled me out of sleep. A soft sound, coming from somewhere near the living room. It wasn't a crash or a loud bang, more like the faint sound of something sliding or moving slowly across the floor. I laid there completely still, staring at the dark outline of the window. I tried to listen for it again. After about 30 seconds, I heard another small sound, like a footstep or a heel pressing lightly against the wood floor. I felt a rush of adrenaline hit me so fast I could feel it in my hands. I didn't move for several minutes. The only thing I could hear was the faint ticking of the old clock on the dresser. I told myself it was probably a noise from outside. Maybe a branch rubbing against the siding, or something shifting with the wind. I forced myself to close my eyes again. When I woke up for real, it was morning. The light coming through the window made everything feel normal again. I got up, made coffee, and walked through the house to shake off the nerves from the night. But when I reached the living room, I stopped. The small throw blanket I'd left folded on the arm of the couch was now on the floor. Not bunched up, not halfway hanging. It was laid flat on the floor, like someone had placed it there on purpose. I froze, staring at it. I tried to think if I might have knocked it down, but it didn't make sense. I hadn't gone near it after I'd set it there. I went to check the front door. The deadbolt was still locked from the inside. I checked the windows too. All were closed and latched. Nothing was broken. Still, something about it felt wrong. The rest of the day was normal enough. I went out to work, came back around 5, made dinner, and sat on the couch watching something on TV. As it got dark, I started to notice how quiet the area was again. The whole neighborhood felt like it was asleep before 9 p.m. I didn't see anyone walk by. No cars drove down the street, and the silence just kept getting heavier. When I got ready for bed, I decided to leave a small lamp on in the corner of the bedroom. I thought maybe the light would make it easier to fall asleep if I woke up again. I lay there scrolling my phone until I felt tired, then turned over and tried to sleep. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I woke up again. It was the same thing, that slow feeling of being pulled out of a dream into alertness. My eyes opened, and I could tell instantly something felt wrong. The air felt too still. Then I heard it, a very faint creak from the floorboards, just outside the bedroom door. My breathing got shallow. I stared at the small line of light coming through the crack at the bottom of the door. I couldn't see movement, but I felt it. Someone was standing there. I stayed completely silent. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was shaking my whole chest. The door didn't open, but I could hear a slow, deliberate sound, like someone's breathing, faint but there, just beyond the door. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't hear footsteps walking away, just silence again. I stayed awake until dawn, not moving. When the light finally came, I got up and checked everything again. The living room looked the same, the kitchen was the same. The front door was still locked, but when I looked closer, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The wood near the handle had faint scrape marks, like someone had tried to slide something into the latch. They were small, but they hadn't been there the day before. That was enough for me. I packed up my stuff right away, threw it in the car, and sat in the driveway for a few minutes trying to calm down. I didn't know if it was someone trying to break in, or if someone already had a key. I messaged the host to say I was checking out early, but I didn't say why. I just needed to leave. On the drive out, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the yard or on the porch. But the house just sat there, gray and quiet under the trees, like it had been waiting for me to go. I ended up staying at a motel the next 2 nights. It wasn't great, but at least there were people around, and I could hear traffic outside the window. That quiet house stuck in my head, though. A few days later, I checked the Airbnb listing again, thinking I'd leave a review warning others to stay away. But it was gone, completely removed. Months later, I saw an article online while scrolling late one night. It was about that same town. The headline mentioned a local man who'd been arrested after breaking into several short-term rental homes in the area. Apparently, he targeted Airbnbs that were self-check-in only, no hosts on site. He'd watch the listings for new guests, wait until late at night, and use a lockpick or spare key he'd found from a maintenance worker years earlier. He never stole anything major. He just liked sneaking in and watching people sleep. Reading that hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the thought that he might have been in that house with me. It was knowing that I'd felt it, every second of it, and had tried to convince myself it was nothing. Ever since then, I've never stayed in an Airbnb alone again. Even if I do book one, I check every lock, every window, and every closet before I can even think about sleeping. Because that house taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what's outside your door. It's realizing someone might have already been inside. I booked the Airbnb on a whim after my work trip got extended by a week. My company had already paid for the first few nights at a hotel, but after the conference ended, I needed something cheaper. I found a small private guest house listed on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, just a single room attached to someone's property. The pictures showed a clean space, neutral walls, a kitchenette, and a small patio facing some open land. The reviews were mixed, but it was available and within my budget, so I booked it without thinking too much. When I arrived, it was early evening. The sky was gray, and everything looked damp from a light drizzle earlier in the day. The place was about 15 minutes from the main road, down a long gravel driveway that wound past some tall weeds and scattered trees. There was a main house farther back, and a detached structure on the side that looked like an old converted garage. That was the guest house. The owner wasn't around when I got there. Just a key in a lockbox and a short note taped to the door telling me to make myself at home. Inside, the space smelled faintly like cleaning chemicals and old wood. The floor creaked in spots. The main area had a bed, a table, a small TV, and a kitchenette with a mini fridge and a two-burner stove. The bathroom was tucked in the corner, tiny, with a shower stall that had a glass door slightly fogged from scratches and age. Everything was neat but clearly used. The blinds on the windows were thin, barely covering the glass, and I remember thinking I might buy something to clip them tighter. The first night was uneventful. I cooked something simple, worked on my laptop for a while, then went to bed around midnight. The only thing that bothered me was how quiet it got. The property was far enough from the main road that I couldn't hear traffic. No dogs, no people talking, no city sounds. Just the occasional rustle of wind through the grass outside. I left a light on in the kitchenette just so the place wouldn't feel so empty. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up for no reason. My phone showed 3:12 a.m. I wasn't sure what woke me, but I could hear faint movement outside, like footsteps on gravel. Not fast or loud, just the crunch of someone walking slowly near the building. I froze for a second, holding my breath. Then I told myself it was probably an animal. It was a rural area. Raccoons, stray dogs, even deer could easily make those sounds. Still, it took me a while to fall asleep again. The next morning, I noticed something small but strange. The outdoor patio chair, just a simple plastic one, had been moved slightly. It wasn't facing the same way as before. I could have brushed it off as the wind, but the way it was positioned didn't make sense. It was turned directly toward the bedroom window. I stood there staring at it for a moment, trying to remember if I'd left it like that, but I knew I hadn't sat outside the night before. I straightened it back and went inside, telling myself I was overthinking it. That evening, I worked until late again. I kept the blinds closed this time. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and climbed into bed. The silence was heavier now, like the air itself felt different. I started drifting off, and then I heard it again, slow, steady footsteps on gravel. Closer this time, then nothing, just a long pause. I didn't move. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I stared at the ceiling, counting seconds in my head. After a while, the sound faded away. I stayed awake another hour before finally sleeping. In the morning, I checked outside. The patio chair was in the same place I left it. But when I looked closer, there were faint marks on the ground, small, uneven prints leading away from the patio, toward the side of the building. They looked like shoe prints, but not clear enough to be certain. I followed them a few steps until they disappeared near the edge of the grass. That day I felt uneasy, but I didn't have anywhere else to stay, and I didn't want to sound paranoid if I complained. I went about my day, got groceries, kept to myself. When I came back that evening, the sun was already setting, and the whole property had that still, empty feeling again. I remember how quiet the gravel sounded under my tires, almost muffled. I tried to distract myself that night by watching something on my laptop. I left a few lights on and shut every curtain as tight as I could. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint noise again, but this time it wasn't footsteps. It was a soft tapping, like someone's finger lightly knocking on glass. I turned my head slowly toward the window by the kitchenette. The blinds were drawn, but the tapping was definitely coming from there. Tap, tap, then silence. I didn't move for several minutes. The only light was from my laptop screen, and it cast faint shadows across the room. I wanted to check, but every instinct told me not to. I just sat still and waited. After maybe 10 minutes, I got up and walked quietly to the window. I lifted the edge of the blind just a little. Nothing, just darkness. The patio chair was barely visible under the dim security light from the main house. The yard looked empty. I stood there for a while, watching, until I convinced myself it had to be some loose branch or maybe rain hitting the glass. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The little kitchen window, the same one the tapping had come from, had faint smudge marks on it, like fingerprints, for distinct streaks pressed against the glass from the outside. I touched the inside of the glass to compare. Mine didn't line up. Whoever or whatever touched it had done so from outside, leaning close enough to leave those marks. I checked the rest of the place. Nothing else seemed disturbed. The lock on the door was still secure, the patio furniture unmoved. I tried to shake it off again, but that creeping feeling stuck with me all day. That evening, I parked my car differently, closer to the door, so my headlights faced the patio. I figured if anyone came by, the motion sensors or the angle of my car might help me see them. I also propped a metal spoon on the inside of the doorknob, balanced so it would fall and make noise if the door moved. It must have been close to 3 a.m. again when I woke to the sound of my car's headlights flashing through the blinds. Like something had triggered the motion lights. I sat up fast, staring toward the window. A few seconds later, I heard the crunch of gravel again, moving slowly, right outside the wall by the bed. Then silence. I sat there, frozen, listening. After maybe a full minute, I heard the faintest metallic sound, the spoon shifting, then dropping. That tiny noise was enough to make my chest tighten. Someone had touched the door. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited. Then came another sound, softer this time, like a quiet scrape, maybe fingernails or fabric brushing wood. Then nothing. The air felt thick. I stayed like that for nearly an hour before I dared to get up. When the first light of dawn came through, I opened the door. My car was exactly where I left it, but on the gravel right near the step were clear footprints, boot prints this time. Fresh, sharp edges in the dirt. They led from the side of the building straight toward the main road, vanishing near the tree line. I packed my things in under 10 minutes. I didn't even make coffee or shower. I threw everything in the car and left. I didn't tell the host anything. I didn't even lock the door. I just drove until I hit the main road and didn't stop until I reached a diner in town. I sat there for an hour, shaking, trying to calm down. Later that afternoon, out of curiosity, I checked the listing again. It was gone, completely deleted, no photos, no reviews, nothing. I tried to find the address through my booking email, and even that had been removed by the platform. It was as if it had never been listed. A few days later, I searched the property on Google Maps just to make sense of where I'd stayed. The street view image was from a few years back. The main house was there, but the guest house, the little detached building, wasn't. There was just an empty patch of grass where it should have been. To this day, I have no idea who was walking around that place at night, or even if the person who listed it actually owned it. But I remember the smell of that room, the way the gravel crunched under those slow steps, and how the fingerprints looked on that glass. I've stayed in dozens of Airbnbs since then, but I never rent any that are detached from the main house. And I never, ever stay somewhere that quiet again. I booked the Airbnb on a Wednesday night after scrolling for hours, looking for something small and quiet for a weekend away. I'd been working nonstop for months, and the idea of spending 2 nights alone somewhere rural, away from city noise, felt like the reset I needed. The place was listed as a private apartment, a cozy 1-bedroom space on the edge of a small town about 3 hours from where I lived. The photos showed a neat little living area, a compact kitchen, and a view of rolling fields out back. The reviews were decent, not glowing, but consistent. People mentioned the host was helpful and that the area was peaceful. I didn't overthink it, I just wanted somewhere to be alone for a bit. The drive there was long and quiet. As I got farther from the main highway, the landscape opened into wide stretches of farmland and narrow roads that twisted between patches of forest. By the time I reached the town, the sun was already setting. It was one of those towns where everything seemed to shut down early. There was a gas station, a diner, a small grocery store, and not much else. The GPS led me to a gravel road lined with tall, untrimmed hedges. The house appeared after a bend. 2 stories, white paint faded and peeling, with a detached structure behind it that looked like a converted shed. That, according to the listing, was the private apartment. When I pulled in, a man came out from the main house almost immediately. He waved and smiled in a way that felt rehearsed, like he'd done it many times before. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, a little overweight, with thinning hair and glasses that caught the light as he walked closer. He introduced himself and reached out a hand, but I just smiled back and said hello, trying to keep things polite but brief. I noticed right away how quiet it was. No wind, no sounds from the road, not even distant traffic. Just the faint creak of the house behind him and the crunch of gravel under his shoes. He said he'd show me around, and I didn't think much of it. Hosts sometimes did that, just to make sure guests knew where things were. I followed him toward the small building behind the house. It was more of a studio than an apartment, with one main room that held a bed, a couch, a tiny table, and a kitchenette. There was a small bathroom tucked in the corner, clean but plain. It looked exactly like the photos, which was a relief. I remember thinking that it wasn't bad at all. Simple, a bit worn, but comfortable enough for 2 nights. But what stood out was how the host didn't leave. He talked as he moved around the space, pointing out things that were obvious, where the light switches were, how the remote worked, which drawer had silverware. I nodded along, waiting for him to finish, but when he sat down on the couch and started talking about the area, it felt strange. His tone was too casual, too familiar, like he wasn't talking to a guest, but to someone he knew. He asked how far I'd driven, what I did for work, if I was staying alone. I tried to keep my answers short and vague, avoiding eye contact, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. He lingered, sitting there, rubbing his hands together slowly, eyes scanning the room in an unfocused way. I remember the sound of the clock ticking above the bed, each second feeling louder. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I stood up and thanked him again, saying I'd had a long drive and needed to rest. That finally made him get up. He smiled again, said something about how the place was very safe, and stepped out. I locked the door behind him and checked it twice. The rest of the evening passed quietly. I unpacked, ate a small meal, and tried to relax. I told myself he was just overly friendly, maybe lonely, maybe just bad at reading social cues. I watched a show on my laptop for a bit, but I couldn't fully unwind. The blinds were thin, and I kept catching myself glancing at the window facing the main house. The light from his porch was on, and every now and then I thought I saw movement through the glass. Shadows passing, slow and deliberate. It was probably nothing, I told myself, just nerves. By 10:30, I decided to shower and go to bed. The water pressure was low, and the bathroom light flickered slightly, the kind of dim yellow glow that makes everything look older than it is. I remember how the sound of the water seemed too loud in the quiet of that place, echoing off the walls. I turned the shower off after a few minutes and wrapped myself in a towel, wiping the fog from the mirror. For a moment, I thought I heard something faint, the creak of a floorboard or maybe the wind outside. I brushed it off, dried my hair quickly, and stepped out into the main room. That's when I saw it. The bedroom door was mostly closed, but there was a thin line of light spilling through the gap at the bottom, the hallway light I'd left on. And there, in that strip of light, were 2 shadows. 2 feet, standing motionless, just outside the door. I froze completely. My heart started pounding so fast it hurt. I couldn't breathe for a second. I waited, hoping I was imagining it, that maybe it was just my bag or something casting a shape, but the shadows shifted slightly. Someone was there, standing inches from the door. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, not moving, barely breathing. Then, slowly, the shadow moved away. I didn't hear footsteps, no sound at all, but the light beneath the door cleared. My whole body was shaking. I locked the bedroom door, dragged the small dresser in front of it, and sat on the bed, clutching my phone. I checked the time, 11:12 p.m. I thought about calling someone, maybe even the police, but I didn't know what I'd even say. I hadn't seen anyone. I didn't know for sure if it was him. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made me jump. The wind brushing against the siding, the faint creak of the ceiling, the sound of my own breathing echoing in the quiet. I sat there with the lamp on until the first light of morning came through the blinds. As soon as it was bright enough, I packed my things, opened the door carefully, and stepped outside. The air was cold, and everything was still. The main house's front door was closed, but I could see the curtains move slightly, like someone had just stepped away from the window. I didn't bother checking out or saying goodbye. I tossed my bag into the car, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. I didn't stop until I hit the main road again, where the signal returned to my phone. That's when I finally opened the Airbnb app and reported what happened. I didn't even try to make it sound dramatic. I just wrote everything exactly as it was. A few days later, I got an email from Airbnb's safety team. They said they'd received other complaints about the same host, women who had stayed alone and reported that he had come into their rental units at night using a spare key. Some said they'd woken up to the sound of a door unlocking, others that he'd made excuses about checking the heat or making sure everything was fine. My stomach turned as I read the message. They told me the listing had been removed and that the host's account was permanently suspended. A week after that, I got a call from a local number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer, but later, when I checked the voicemail, it was from a woman who introduced herself as a neighbor of the property. She'd heard what happened and wanted me to know that the owner had a history of letting himself into the rental when women stayed alone. She said a few locals had even warned him about it before, but he always brushed it off. That call made something inside me click. That uneasy feeling I'd had the entire time, the way he'd lingered, the questions he'd asked, the way the curtains had moved that morning. It all fit together in a way that made my skin crawl. I thought about how easily it could have gone worse, how I might not have locked the bedroom door, how I might have gone to bed earlier, not noticing the shadow at all, how that thin line of light under the door, something so small, might have been the only thing that stopped him from coming in. I still rent Airbnb sometimes, but I check everything now. Every door, every window, every lock. I never assume the listing description is exactly what it says. I read every review like it's a warning. And whenever a host insists on showing me around, I make sure someone knows exactly where I am. Because that night, in that quiet rural apartment, I learned something I'll never forget. Sometimes, the danger isn't hidden in the dark or lurking outside. Sometimes, it's standing right in front of you, smiling, holding the keys. I booked an Airbnb in a small rural town for a weekend trip. I'd been feeling burnt out, and I wanted somewhere quiet. A place with no traffic, no noise, no schedule. The listing I found seemed perfect. It was a small detached apartment behind an old farmhouse, surrounded by open land. The pictures showed a clean interior, simple furniture, and a view of the fields stretching out into the distance. The host's reviews were positive, saying it was peaceful and private. That's all I wanted. I arrived late Friday afternoon. The drive from the city took nearly 4 hours, most of it through back roads that wound through farmland and patches of forest. The farther I drove, the emptier it got. By the time I reached the turnoff for the property, I hadn't passed another car in nearly 20 minutes. The long dirt driveway led me past a faded mailbox, through a line of tall trees, and then opened up to a wide clearing where the farmhouse stood. The main house looked old, 2 stories, white paint peeling off the sides, a wraparound porch that sagged slightly. The guest house was behind it, a small single-story unit that looked newer, maybe built in the last 10 years. It had its own parking area, a little patio, and a single door with a keypad lock. I parked, stretched my legs, and just listened for a moment. It was completely still except for the faint rustling of the wind in the grass. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cleaning spray, but under that was the dry scent of wood and dust. The place was small but clean. A bed, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a sitting area with a couch facing a window. The fridge was empty except for a few bottles of water. I unpacked, set my things on the counter, and walked outside again. From the patio, I could see the back of the farmhouse maybe 100 feet away, and behind that, nothing but flat fields stretching out to the tree line. There was no sign of the host, which was fine by me. I preferred not having to interact with anyone. The sun was setting by then, the sky turning orange behind the trees, and I remember thinking how quiet it was. Too quiet. No cars, no people, no distant dogs barking. Just the occasional chirp of a cricket. It was peaceful, but it also made me feel strangely aware of every small sound I made. That first night, I cooked something simple, watched a show on my laptop, and went to bed early. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint noise. It was soft, rhythmic, and distant at first, like someone walking slowly on gravel. My first thought was that maybe the host had returned home late, or someone was walking to the main house from the road. I lay there listening, trying to place it. The footsteps, if that's what they were, seemed to come and go. Then it stopped completely. The silence after was almost louder. I turned on the small lamp beside the bed, got up and looked out the window. The night outside was pitch black, except for a faint light from the farmhouse. I couldn't see movement anywhere. After a few minutes, I went back to bed and eventually fell asleep again. The next morning was normal. I went into town for breakfast and some groceries, then came back and spent the day reading and walking around the property. It really was peaceful during the day. But when evening came, that strange, uneasy feeling returned. The air seemed heavier once the sun went down, and the silence around the place made every small sound noticeable. At one point, while sitting on the patio around dusk, I heard something faint coming from the trees beyond the field. A kind of metallic clank, like someone moving a piece of metal or maybe closing a gate. It happened once, then again a few minutes later, and then it stopped. I stared toward the trees for a long time, but there was nothing to see. That night, I went to bed around 11. I left the lamp on this time. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt uneasy. The stillness of the place made it easy for your mind to fill in blanks. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the lamp was still on, but the room looked different. The light seemed dimmer, and I had that instant feeling of wrongness, like something had woken me, but I couldn't tell what. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Then I heard it again, soft, uneven steps outside, moving across the gravel path that ran between the farmhouse and the guest house. Slow, deliberate steps. They stopped, then started again, closer this time. My heart started pounding. I could feel it in my neck. I turned my head toward the window. The curtain was half open, and through the small gap, I could see just the edge of the yard. There was faint movement. A shape, darker than the night, standing still near the corner of the guest house. I blinked hard, thinking maybe it was a shadow or something my tired eyes were misinterpreting, but it didn't move away. It stood there for several seconds before shifting, just a slow turn like whoever it was had changed direction. Then I heard the faint scrape of gravel again, moving away toward the trees. I stayed awake for hours, too afraid to move, until the sun finally started to rise. When it was light enough, I got up and checked outside. There were faint footprints in the dirt, clear shoe prints, going from the side of the guest house toward the tree line. They weren't mine. They were too large and spaced unevenly, like someone had been moving slowly or limping. I walked toward the main house, but it looked completely empty. The curtains were drawn, and the front door had a padlock on it from the outside. That made me uneasy. I hadn't noticed that before. I realized I hadn't seen any sign of the host since I arrived. The rest of the day I couldn't relax. Every noise made me jump. A gust of wind, the creak of the house, the hum of the fridge. Around noon, I decided I'd leave the next morning instead of staying the full weekend. I spent the day trying to distract myself, but by evening the feeling of being watched got worse. I kept catching myself glancing toward the windows. That night, I made sure every door and window was locked. I stacked a chair under the doorknob, I even left the light in the bathroom on to make the place less dark. I lay down fully dressed, phone in my hand, listening. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a soft metallic rattle. It came from the direction of the back door, the one that led to the patio. A slow, quiet sound of metal shifting, like someone gently testing the handle. I froze completely. The sound stopped for a few seconds, then came again, a little louder this time. My chest felt tight. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The rattling went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped again. Silence followed. I didn't move for at least a full minute, just staring at the ceiling. Then I heard a slow, dragging sound, something brushing lightly across the siding of the house, right beneath the window. It went from one end to the other, then stopped. I turned off the lamp and lay perfectly still in the dark. My phone screen glowed faintly in my hand. The air felt heavy, too warm suddenly. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. After a while, it went quiet again. No more movement, no more sounds. I stayed like that until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the curtains. I didn't move until I was sure it was morning. When I finally got up, I went straight to the back door. The metal handle was scratched, like someone had jammed something thin into it, maybe a knife or a screwdriver. I stepped outside and looked down. There were fresh footprints again, clearer this time, leading from the door toward the trees. I didn't bother to shower or eat. I packed my stuff in silence, loaded it into the car, and drove out of there without looking back. The sun had just come up, and the fields were covered in low fog. The house looked small and harmless in the morning light, but the sight of it made my stomach twist. When I got back to town later that day, I finally checked the Airbnb app. The listing was still active, so I scrolled through the photos again. This time I noticed something I hadn't before. In one of the pictures of the yard, there was a man in the background, half hidden behind the corner of the main house. He wasn't mentioned anywhere in the listing, and his face wasn't clear. It looked like he was watching whoever took the photo. I reported the listing immediately, but when I checked back a week later, it was gone. The profile had been deleted entirely. I still don't know who that was outside those nights, whether it was someone living in the woods nearby or someone using the empty farmhouse as a hiding spot. All I know is that the footsteps, the scratched handle, and those footprints were real. And now, every time I rent a place, I always check the photos twice, especially the corners and reflections, because you never really know who might already be there, just out of view, watching.